We often talk about the Bible as the book. But what if that's not quite right? What if we thought of it more like an ancient library? Thinking about it that way brings up a massive question. How in the world do you properly read a collection of texts written in so many different styles over thousands of years? I mean, it's a huge challenge, right? The Bible is just packed with all sorts of writing. You've got these sweeping historical stories, beautiful poetry, super detailed legal codes, really personal letters, and these mind-bending prophetic visions. If you try to read a poem the same way you read a law book, you're just going to miss the point completely. A one-size-fits-all approach is doomed to fail.
So, where do we even start? Well, biblical scholars are pretty much all on the same page here. The very first step before you do anything else is to ask one simple question. What kind of writing am I looking at? That single step can unlock the real meaning and save you from a ton of confusion. It's kind of like knowing whether you're reading a newspaper article or a comic strip. You just follow different rules. Okay, let's see how this works in practice. We'll start with our first case study, the genre of prophecy. Now, when most of us hear that word, our minds immediately jump to predicting the future, right? Like looking into a crystal ball. But that's actually only a tiny part of the picture. Scholars have two key terms that are super helpful here. Foretelling is exactly what you think it is, predicting future events. But, and this is the big one, the primary job of a prophet was actually forthtelling. This was all about proclaiming God's message to the people right in their present moment, calling them out on what they were doing and warning them about the immediate consequences. Now, when the prophets did foretell the future, the New Testament shows those predictions coming true in some really complex and fascinating ways. Yeah, sometimes it's a direct, literal fulfillment. But other times, it's something called typological. Think about Jonah spending 3 days in the great fish. The New Testament writers saw that as a pattern or a type for Jesus being in the tomb for 3 days. They saw these incredible connections everywhere. Some fulfillments are more spiritual than literal, and others seem to happen in stages, partially fulfilled in Jesus' first coming, but fully wrapped up at his second. So what's the bottom line here? The prophetic books were never meant to be a secret code book for figuring out future world events. Their main goal, their whole point, was to be a direct, powerful message to the original audience, pushing them to live faithfully and warning them to get back on track. And that's the lens we need to read them through. All right, let's carry that same thinking forward to our second case study, the Gospels. We usually think of them as straightforward biographies, but their actual genre is a little more specific and a lot more interesting. The Gospels are best understood as theological biographies. This was actually a common way to write back in the ancient Greco-Roman world. What it means is that the authors were absolutely dealing with real historical events, but they were carefully choosing and arranging those events to communicate a very specific theological message about who Jesus is. And this has huge implications for how we read them. The authors weren't trying to write some minute-by-minute chronicle of Jesus' life. They were selective, picking the stories that best made their point. They often arrange their material by theme, not always in perfect chronological order, so you might see a bunch of miracle stories grouped together. And, a really big one, they summarized long speeches, which was a totally standard and accepted thing to do back then. The Sermon on the Mount is the perfect example. If you read it out loud, it takes, 15 minutes maybe? It's pretty doubtful that the real sermon was that short. What we have in Matthew is more like the greatest hits version, an accurate and powerful summary of Jesus' core teachings. And to an ancient audience, this was considered completely valid and historically reliable. Okay, for our final case study, let's dig into the epistles, or letters, which make up a huge chunk of the New Testament. And if you've ever felt like you're just dropping into the middle of a conversation when you read them, well, it's because you are. Honestly, this is the perfect way to think about it. When you read an epistle, it's like listening to one side of a phone call. We've got Paul's words, but we can't hear what the person on the other end is saying. We don't have the letter they sent him. We don't have the full story of the drama going on. We only have one side of the dialogue, and we have to piece together the whole context from that. This is what scholars call their occasional nature. These letters weren't written as abstract theology textbooks for all time. They were pastoral responses written for a very specific occasion, a particular problem, a dangerous false teaching, or a question that popped up in a specific church at a specific moment. To really get the letter, we have to play detective and try to reconstruct that original situation. And lucky for us, we have clues to help. First-century letters followed a really predictable structure. They'd start with a salutation. Hey, it's Paul writing to the church in Rome. Then came a prayer of thanksgiving. After that, you get the main body, the whole reason for the letter.
then some practical commands, and finally, a closing farewell. Knowing this predictable flow is the key, because it helps you see when an author does something unusual. And this is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Often, the real message is found when an author intentionally breaks those rules. The letter to the Galatians is a total masterclass in this. So Paul takes the standard opening, the salutation, and he expands it to fiercely defend his authority as an apostle. He says he was sent not from men, nor by men, but by Jesus Christ. He's drawing a line in the sand from the very first sentence. Then he does something that for a first-century letter writer would be shocking. He completely skips the Thanksgiving section. He just jumps right into, "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting." That immediately tells the reader how urgent the problem is and just how angry he is. The missing piece of the letter speaks volumes. So we've looked at prophecy, theological biography, and personal letters. Each one has its own rules, its own conventions, its own way of getting a message across. So what's the single most important takeaway from all of this? It really all comes down to this. Genre is the key. Before we can ask what a text means, we have to know what it is. Is it a prophetic warning, a theological biography? Is it someone else's mail? Identifying the genre is the non-negotiable first step that shapes every other part of how we understand it. And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought to chew on. The literary forms we see in the Bible were the common, everyday communication methods of their time. So what would that look like in our age of instant global communication? Would it be a viral video series, a chart-topping podcast, a blog? It's a wild question that reminds us that the medium is always, always part of the message.